I hope we were able to provide a space for you all to come together and celebrate the rich diversity of what makes Texas so great. And all of you make Texas great for coming here, for participating, and for being a part of the conversation. So a big Texas thank you to all of you. Now, I want to say a few thank yous here for all the volunteers, the production staff, and the teams who make this possible. Please give them a round of applause. We can't do this without volunteers, so we really appreciate you all taking your time for participating and for being a part of our team, so we really appreciate it. I also would love for you to thank our Texas Tribune team. I know they're all exhausted, but please give them a big thank you. I want to acknowledge our peers in the media who have joined us at the festival this year. You've heard many of them who have participated on stage. They've covered the news from our stages and partner with the Tribune day in and day out. We are grateful for all of you for being here. Thank you. And to Sewell Chan, our EIC, who's leaving to go join the Columbia Journalism Review. They're lucky for them, but thank you for everything you've done, Sewell. And a huge congratulations to Matthew Watkins for becoming our new editor-in-chief, and as he takes the helm of the newsroom. Thank you to our sponsors, foundations, donors, members. You make the events and our journalism possible. Texas is better because of your generosity. Thank you. And for all of you, thank you for believing in the Texas Tribune, in our mission, and in our next chapter. We've got so much to do, and you have made this the best Texas Tribune Festival yet. So thank you. Now you're going to have to listen to me as I run through this list of all of our sponsors. We can't do this without our sponsors, so it's important for us to acknowledge them and for all the great work. They make this possible. So let me start with our premier sponsors: Arnold Ventures, BP America, Chevron, Google, PepsiCo, Raise Your Hand Texas, 6th Street, the Sumners Foundation, Visit Fort Worth. And a big thank you to our major sponsors: AARP Texas, Builders, Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority, HCA Healthcare, Houston Landing, Intersect Power, Invenergy, Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas, Panacea Collective, Solar Energy Industries Association, Texas Monthly, UT Health Houston School of Public Health. Now for our supporting sponsors: American Heart Association, Anheuser-Busch, Association of Texas Professional Educators, Athletic Brewing Company, the Austin Community College, Barron Adler, Clough and Otto, the Beer Alliance of Texas, Bipartisan Policy Center, Bookshop.org, Comcast NBC Universal, the Commit Partnership, Energy Foundation, Every Texan, HEB. How much do we love it? Hobby School of Public Affairs, University of Houston. Oh, Houston Endowment, Jackson Walker, JP Morgan Chase, LBJ School of Public Affairs, Livigy, McGuire Woods Consulting, Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, Encore, Perplexity, RACA, Rice Master of Social Policy Evaluation, St. David's Healthcare, Texas AFT, Texas Association of Community Colleges, Texas Council of Developmental Disabilities, Texas Regional Bank, Texas State Historical Association, Texas Almanac, Texas State Technical College, the Bulwark, the Texas Lyceum, Trellis Foundation, UT Press, World Education Services, and our media sponsors: the Austin American Statesman, the Austin Chronicle, the Guardian, Austin PBS, El Paso Matters, Houston Landing, Fort Worth Report, KSAT, ProPublica, Punchbowl News, San Antonio Report, Texas Standard, KUT News. And to all of our student media partners, you are our future: Accent Student Media, Baylor Lariat, Hilltop Views, and the University Star. Thank you all so much. Thank you for making the Texas Tribune what you do, and we appreciate each and every one of you. Now, I get to turn it over to our co-founder and the incredible Evan Smith.
Everybody, good evening. How are you? Thank you, Sonal. What a great day, huh? Now, wait a minute. Were you talking about the festival? I was talking about the UT game. Right? Seriously, thank you so much for being at the festival this year. It's our 14th festival. We think it's our best festival ever. Your being here made so much of a difference. Thank you for being here. Please come back next year. We'd love to have you back. You all, this year it is once again my pleasure to introduce our closing keynote, a conversation with the Honorable Glenn Youngkin, the 74th Governor of Virginia. Elected to lead the Commonwealth in 2021, he is barred, as all of his predecessors have been, by the Virginia Constitution from seeking a second consecutive term, so he won't be on the ballot in 2025. If you're not familiar with his story, it is something like rags to riches. Born in Richmond, raised in Virginia Beach, he grew up, as Time magazine put it, on the precarious end of the middle class. With his father out of work, he washed dishes at a boardwalk diner as a teenager to help his family make ends meet. And he attended Rice University right here in Texas on a basketball scholarship. He went on to earn an MBA at Harvard Business School and then joined the Carlyle Group, the DC private equity firm where he spent 25 years. He rose to be co-CEO and, according to Forbes, amassed a personal fortune of approaching $500 million. When he stepped down in 2020 and launched his first ever campaign for elective office, the dishwasher could comfortably self-fund. His run for governor was no sure thing. Only once had a Republican been elected to the top job over 2 decades. His Democratic opponent, Terry McAuliffe, had served as governor from 2014 to 2018. But he made the role of parents in public education the centerpiece of his agenda in a moment when that political wave was cresting. And he managed, with notable deftness, to walk the fine line between the Bush and MAGA wings of his party, unifying never-Trumpers and forever-Trumpers around his fleece-clad suburban dad candidacy. He squeaked by in the general election by fewer than 64,000 votes out of nearly 3.3 million cast. Unsurprisingly, education has been a focus of Governor Youngkin's one and only term. He counts among his accomplishments historic levels of spending on K-12 education, the launching of lab schools to bring choice into Virginia's public school system, a 12% hike in teacher pay, an emphasis on career and technical education, and an effort to reverse post-pandemic learning loss in math and reading. He's also prioritized economic development, tax relief, pay increases for law enforcement, the streamlining of regulations and permitting, and an overhaul of the behavioral health and foster care systems. In this extraordinary moment for the Commonwealth and our country, we are so lucky to have him here. Please join me in welcoming Governor Glenn Youngkin. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you. Very kind introduction.
Very nice. Thank you, sir.
Bless you.
Good to see you. All right.
Thank you.
Governor, I am reminded how tall you are.
It was a unique advantage on the basketball court. Although when I got to college, I recognized everybody else was either just as tall, if not taller,
or taller,
which is why I didn't play a professional career.
No, it's all right. Well, good. I appreciate you coming. Thank you so much. You were here 2 years ago.
Yeah.
You were still relatively unknown at that time outside of Virginia, not anymore. There are an awful lot of governors, even those of us who are paid to pay attention to this, we could not pick out of a police lineup. We don't know them at all. We all know you. What happened in the time that you've been governor, as you think about it, that put you on all of our radar screens? What is special about the Commonwealth? Give us the Virginia story that you think has made you so well known.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Sure.
And it is spectacular to be back here at TribFest.
Thank you.
But also to be in Austin.
Right.
And my wife's down here. She was born and raised in Austin, grew up in Austin. Her parents live here. My niece is in school here. And so when we come back to Austin, we feel at home, and we want to make sure we get to Terry Black's and Cisco's every time we're in town.
By the way, very, very good references.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
Was
I know where I'm going to eat.
You know where you're going.
I like to eat.
Yeah. So what is it?
So first of all, I was not in the political world. I was in the business world, and I was in my dream job. I never thought I would have a chance to lead the Carlyle Group. But here I was in 2017, offered the opportunity with another gentleman to take over from three legendary founders, this firm.
Right.
And so I'm in my dream job. In the summer of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, Carlyle was doing very well. And I felt a real calling on my life, and I was very upset with what I saw happening in Virginia. My home state, the cradle of democracy, was really faltering. And the level of the faltering was pretty extensive. We first had seen our schools closed for an unprecedented period of time. Virginia was 44th in the nation in getting our schools back open. We had a 20-year high in murder rate. We had small businesses closing left and right for 9 straight years. More people had moved away from Virginia than to Virginia from the other 49 states. And on top of that, we had seen job growth absolutely flatline. That was not the Virginia that I grew up in. And so I felt a real sense of opportunity and service to step in and say, hey, at least let's try. And so I asked my amazing wife on a Friday night if she would support me in this, that I would quit my job the next day and start figuring out how to run for governor. After she stopped crying, which was really a moment, and she decided she wasn't calling 911, we decided that we would actually do this. And in we went. And yeah, I had a tough opponent. I mean, Terry McAuliffe was the presumptive winner. He had been governor. He was going to be governor again.
He was extremely well known. He had a huge amount of money to run his campaign.
He was the Clinton machine.
Right, he was.
And on top of that, for 12 years, as you said, Virginia hadn't elected a Republican statewide.
Right.
So we step into this moment. And Evan, I had never campaigned before. And someone asked me a very simple question. How are you going to win? And on a radio interview, I responded, well, I'm going to get more votes than the other guy.
Right.
And the reality is that's how you win elections.
It's a process answer, but I can't argue with it. Right?
And what it really reflected was, first, a real need to explain to people who I am.
Right.
And people would ask me all the time, what kind of Republican are you? And I would say, well, let me tell you what I believe. I believe in low taxes. I believe in streamlined regulations. I believe in the power of free enterprise. I believe that parents should be at the head of the table in their children's lives. I think that we should have more police on the street versus less police. I think government should work for you and not tell you what to do all the time. And I also believe that we can do this a lot better. And as I carried that message around the Commonwealth, one of the things that I also believe in is I have to talk to people and listen to them and ask them for their vote. And so I campaigned everywhere. I campaigned in the projects. I campaigned deeply in the Latino community and in the Asian community and the Indian community. We worked terribly hard to get women back into the Republican Party after they had moved away. And what I found over the course of the entire campaign was that was unique. And I think voters appreciated it.
Hadn't happened.
I had one group, the Hindu American Coalition. I went to visit one of the largest coalitions of Indian business leaders in Virginia. And after we were done with a big discussion, the chairman of the board said, Glenn, we agree on everything, but you're the first Republican to come see us in 10 years.
Yeah.
And so it really struck me that this is a matter of not only having a plan, but also making sure that we communicate it and listen.
Well, you got to ask people to vote for you.
Yeah.
Governor, you had not, as you say, you had not run for office before. I want to come to many of the things you said that were components of the campaign or your first term, but running for office is no fun these days, right? I mean, people in public life are attacked. It's a very hard thing for your family to have to endure. I mean, you and I were visiting backstage about the normalizing of political violence these days, especially the literal threat to you and yours if you decide to serve. Did you consider that? Was that something that might have caused you not to make this decision?
Yeah, we did consider it.
Yeah.
And it's all real. And we talked to my family about it, and I will say, listen, there was real concern. My kids were not little at the time. I had one in grad school, 2 in college, and 1 in high school. And they were concerned. And
this experience changes your family.
It changes your family.
Right.
And my amazing wife, Suzanne, was really concerned about our family and concerned about me.
Yeah.
But we also committed ourselves that if we could run a campaign and then serve in a way that was consistent with our values, then we would do that. And if we won, we would serve, and if we lost, well, then we did everything we were supposed to do.
So let's set the table, Governor, if we can, right? Time-wise, we're talking about 2021. It's the height of the pandemic, right? This is post-George Floyd, right? You're right in the middle of a discussion about what government can and should be telling people they can and can't do.
Yeah.
And again, parents' rights was really the lens. Did something catalyze that specifically? How did that come out of the laboratory, right? We know this is going to be the way we're going to construct our campaign around this. How did that come to you?
Well, two clarifying comments. First, we're coming right on the heels of 2020.
Right.
And Joe Biden won Virginia by 10 points.
Right.
And that's just...
And at no point did you think he hadn't won?
No. He won by 10 points.
I'm sorry to say I've got to ask that question always just to be sure.
No, he won by 10 points.
He won.
And then second of all, we in fact had in the pandemic moment a state that had adopted very, very aggressive policies. Schools were closed, as I said, we're 44th in the nation.
Right.
Small businesses weren't allowed to open. Just to be clear, we have a city, Bristol, Virginia, right? I mean, right down the middle of the street it's State Street. Tennessee's on one side, Virginia's on the other. Tennessee was open, Virginia was closed. I mean, that's what we were seeing as a state. And so as I step into this, one of the big issues, of course, was the reality that first, our children were not back in school, and second of all, that parents were seeing for the first time, up close and personal, what was going on in school and what their children were and were not learning.
So that was the difference. The difference was that because kids were on Zoom school, parents had more of a supervisory role at home and were much more aware of what was going on.
What was going on. Right. And parents were upset. And remember that Virginia's off cycle. There were only 2 statewide elections going on that year, Virginia and New Jersey.
New Jersey, right.
And therefore the eyes of the nation were on what was going on in Virginia. And of course, Loudoun County became ground zero for the parents' movements. Right. Parents, Republicans, Democrats, independents, they wanted their children back in school, and they wanted curriculum to focus on educating their children to be prepared for life.
Yeah.
And that was such a big step for Virginia parents to have that kind of transparency, and it became one of, if not the issue of the election.
Well, it became the issue of the election in part because you had a debate, I believe it was the second debate with Governor McAuliffe, where he said famously, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach, right? That was perceived to be the gaffe that turned the election in your direction. So we know that this was the issue of the campaign.
Well, and running into that, there was this clear understanding that the progressive left was comfortable with the schools being closed. The progressive left was comfortable with the curriculum as it was being delivered into the schools. And the progressive left also was very comfortable with all the kids masked up all the time.
Right.
And what Terry McAuliffe did in that debate was nothing other than confirm, yes, that's what they believe. They believe that bureaucrats and politicians and administrators should take the front seat at the table and parents should be in the back seat.
Right.
And parents, I'm a parent. I don't believe that. I want to make sure that I have first say about what happens in my children's lives. Right. And that's what all parents believe.
So correct me on this if I'm wrong, but you had criticized him before this debate for vetoing a bill that would have allowed parents to opt out of reading assignments.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
So let me put myself in the frame of an educator, in the frame of mind of an educator. Don't you trust educators to do their jobs? If educators believe that books should be on a syllabus or part of a course, haven't we for years trusted our educators to make decisions that were good enough to educate us? Why would they not be good enough to educate our kids?
Because there were books that were put on the curriculum for classes that families, and remember, Virginia's an incredibly diverse state.
Right.
We have a large Muslim population, a large Jewish population, a large Hindu population, a large Hispanic population, a large Black population. I mean, we are an incredibly diverse state.
Yep.
And there are materials that were on curriculum that really were inconsistent with a family's personal values. And therefore, this bill was put in front of Governor McAuliffe at the time, passed unanimously out of our Senate. I mean, unanimously.
And to be clear, it was only an opt-out.
And it was transparency and an opt-out for a replacement. And he vetoed it. And that was at the heart of this question, which is who should be making this decision? And I firmly believe that parents should first have full transparency in what's being taught in school. And second of all, if there is something that is completely counter with their family values, they should be able to request a replacement piece to the curriculum.
And the person or the people who get to define what is inconsistent with those values should be the family.
Parents.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Parents.
You know, Governor, I'm not telling you something you don't know. You've gotten a reputation as a consequence of this. Now I'm going to roll forward as the governor who bans books, or as this is the Commonwealth is the place where books are banned. Axios earlier this year reported that nearly 400 book titles were targeted for bans in Virginia libraries last year, and that was among the most in the nation. How did we go from parents opting out, being something that catalyzed your interest in this in part, to more than 400 book bans?
Well, let me just back up. So first of all, the idea of common sense being attributed to a family so they can make a decision about whether their child is reading a book that's consistent with their family values is something, when we explain this, everybody says yes. It doesn't fit with the progressive narrative. And so what they call that is book banning, because it doesn't fit with the narrative.
So is that what Axios is referring to? There are 400 books that parents can opt out of, or have those books been removed?
So there's also a law in Virginia that was on the books for a long time, and it was in code, that says that libraries and school boards get to assess which books are age appropriate in a library.
Right.
And I think we would all agree that there are books that are appropriate for a 12th grader that are not appropriate for a first grader.
Sure.
And so school boards exercise this authority. They've been doing it for a long time, and they do it in all states. And at the end of the day, it didn't fit with the progressive left narrative, and so they do everything they can to sensationalize a process which is really rooted in good common sense, age-appropriate books for kids in school.
And so the criticism is actually of something that had been happening already. Is that your point?
That's my point.
Yeah, this is not new.
It was not new. And on top of that, but the bottom line is the fact that parents, Republicans, independents, and Democrats believe that they should be at the head of the table in their child's life. And they should have a say in their child's life, and things shouldn't happen to their children without parents knowing and being involved, is common sense. It is a strong majority that believes this. Yeah. And so what the progressive left wanted to do was change the narrative and say, oh, this is all about book banning. It's not about book banning. Yeah. This is about empowering parents to have.
And
this is about having parents to have full transparency in what's going on in their kids' lives.
And the authors of books that have been removed from library shelves who say Virginia is censoring us, you say what to them?
I say, first of all, Virginia is not censoring what local school boards are doing, because they've been empowered to do it for a long time.
Okay, so they say school boards are censoring
Local school boards are doing is exercising their legal and responsible right to assess whether books are appropriate in the schools and whether they are age appropriate.
Do you worry that there's been some overcorrection here? We live in the United States of overcorrection on so many things. I mean, I remember Toni Morrison's Beloved coming up in the context of this discussion. I don't know that you or anybody on your campaign specifically called that book out, but we know that that book became part of this conversation. I mean, I remember reading Beloved in school in English class. Is that the kind of book that we want to pull off of a library shelf?
What grade did you read it in?
I mean, high school.
Is it appropriate for a first grader or a second grader?
I'm not sure that any school that I could imagine is teaching Beloved to a first grader.
No, I'm just asking, though.
Yeah.
I'm just asking. By the way, I don't have an opinion other than that. So what the responsibility is for people who do this professionally to ask these questions and come up with answers. I'm going to go back and take us back to where this whole line of questions started.
Yes, sir.
Which is, there was a bipartisan bill passed during the Terry McAuliffe administration, Democrats and Republicans, saying parents should have transparency into the curriculum and they should be able to opt out. That's what this bill is. That's the bill he vetoed. Yeah. That's the one I challenged him on, and that's when he said what he said. Let me back up. So here we are in a moment where this is exactly what Virginians, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, were worried about what the progressive left leadership in the state was doing, which is trying to get parents out of the classroom, and parents want full transparency in what's going on in the classroom.
And that was effectively on the ballot, and the voters decided. So you mentioned masks on students. I mean, this was actually a bit of a larger. The discussion was about more things. It was about, as I understand it, was about mask mandates. It was about vaccine requirements. It was about what history could and could not be taught in schools also?
Well, there was a variety of topics.
Well, I know, but my point is, I think it was actually more, I mean, people think, well, this was only about one thing. In fact, the question of what people should have the control to do or not do was a broader palette of things.
It was a broader palette of things, and one of the things that parents felt very strongly about is if they wanted to have their child wear a mask, they should be able to decide that. And if they didn't, they should be able to decide that.
There should be no vaccine requirements for attending or working in.
If a parent of a 5-year-old wanted their child to get a vaccine, that's a parental decision, but not something that should be mandated.
And it shouldn't have any bearing on whether that child could attend school, for instance.
No,
right? Yeah,
absolutely not.
So what about the history thing? I'm curious about this. Let me tell you why this is ringing in my ears. So Governor Wes Moore was here, your neighbor in the DMV, right?
Yes.
Governor Wes Moore, Democrat from Maryland, was here this weekend, and I was reminded of what he said at the Democratic convention. He said, loving your country does not mean lying about its history. He feels like...
I agree.
I agree. He feels that in some states there has been an effort to whitewash history that's being taught, when in fact what we ought to do is, warts and all, tell people this is where we were and this is where we are.
So I have consistently and clearly said we must teach all of our history, the good and the bad, all of it, all of it. And we can't know where we're going unless we know where we've come from. What I've also said is we shouldn't blame people today for what's happened historically. We just want everybody to understand it. It's why when we've eventually got to the finish line on our history curriculum, we have, I believe, rated the best history curriculum in America today because we tell all of our history. We, in fact, made sure that we were going to include a broad education associated with slavery, with the Reconstruction, with civil rights, also with the Holocaust. And we need to make sure that our students understand these pivotal moments in our history so that we don't ever repeat them. I think this is one of the, again, talking points that oftentimes folks use when the narrative doesn't fit what we're doing. And I frequently talk about the fact that what politicians try to do is they try to push everybody, and particularly, I have to say, what the progressive left does really well is push people into this either-or moment. It's either this or that. And I don't live there. I believe we can live in a both-and world. We can teach all of our history, the good and the bad, and we can make sure that we're not penalizing or trying to blame people today for what happened a long time ago. We can do both of these things. And if we do this well, then in fact we have a generation of students who are educated and are in an ability to make the right decisions going forward, because we're going to have to hand our state and our country to this next generation of students.
The last thing on parents' rights, and I appreciate you indulging me, Governor, is I wonder if there's a point at which we don't want to go too far on this. Others will ask the same question. You know, again, educators are professionals, teachers have been trained, people in administration have had experience in schools and have been trained. Do we want to turn over wholesale control of our education system to parents so it's a bit of a choose-your-adventure system?
Well, first of all, once again, I think, Evan, you're taking an extreme position again when.
Yeah, I'm asking a question. I'm asking you to walk back from it.
You know, homeschooling works great for some families, and that turns it over to parents, completely. And I'm a big advocate for homeschooling. I think it is a great thing for certain families to homeschool. Other families want to make a choice. Does my child go to the public school, to the private school? Other families want to directly engage in the PTA and work in their public school system. We need a system that allows all of that to happen. And to me, that is where we need to get to, which is we need to have school choice. We need to allow homeschooling.
Right.
And on top of that, we need to have great public schools. And it's the reason why I've gone to work to such an extent to make sure that we have record funding. Listen, the per capita funding in Virginia in the 3 years that I've been in has gone up 40%.
40%, $3.5 billion. That's exactly
so thank you
right.
for doing your
yes,
research.
I did.
I mean, it is
always show up prepared, Governor. That's it right there.
This is an unprecedented commitment
Yeah.
to K through 12 education.
Right.
And what we have demonstrated is that once again, in a state that really had literally flatlined economic growth for a long time,
Yeah.
once we actually change the direction of economic growth,
Yes.
and we lower taxes and we drive business growth and we go from bottom third in job growth to top of the rank in job growth,
Right.
we have more people working. We have more receipts into the state. It allows us then to invest in these critical priorities at record levels: education, law enforcement, behavioral health. Listen, I'm a conservationist. We've invested a ton in our rivers and streams and Chesapeake Bay, and the Chesapeake Bay is as clean as it's ever been during our administration. This, to me, is the formula, the playbook for Virginia, and I think for other states, which is if we drive employment and opportunity, we create a business-friendly environment, we can have a virtuous cycle that enables us to continue to reduce costs, lower taxes,
Right.
streamline regulations, and invest record amounts. And this is, at the end of the day, Evan, I believe part of the reason why we have a country that is seeing winning states and losing states. And the formula in the winning states has been one of lower taxes,
What you described.
business-friendly,
Right.
record surplus. We've had 3 straight years of big surplus.
$1.2 billion surplus, is that right?
2, 3, and now 1.2.
Right, yeah.
And it works. And unfortunately, the states where it's not working are ones where they have had runaway spending, they have had poor business environments, and therefore companies are leaving, jobs aren't growing, people are leaving, and they therefore have to raise taxes. And you mentioned earlier, and we know these states. Listen, it's California, it's Illinois, it's New York, it's Maryland. They're struggling. They just had to cut their transportation budget in a huge way because they, in fact, have more people moving away than moving to Maryland.
Governor, this 40% increase, you said it was a 40% increase in the per student allotment for public education. That's interesting as I think about this through the frame of Texas. What we hear here when we talk about how far below the national average we are on per student spending is, well, you know, if spending per student was the determinant of outcomes, then the states that spend the most per student would have great outcomes. That's not the case. Money is not the only issue.
No.
But yet you somehow made the political decision and convinced your fellow Republicans and Democrats in the legislature to go along with this. So what kind of a conversation was like that? I mean, 40% increase in per student spending over the short time you've been in office is not nothing.
No. Well,
how'd you pull that off?
So the biggest components of this were teacher pay.
That was that 12% hike.
At 12%, and now we have 2 more 3% raises in the budget that I just signed.
Right.
So we will go from not being at the national average to being through the national average during our administration in teacher pay. And I think that's hugely important.
Right.
We need great teachers in the classrooms, and we should pay them. And that's been a big, big, big hallmark cornerstone of what we've been doing in education.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
We had to make significant investment for Virginia students with disabilities. And the developmentally disabled students in Virginia needed more attention. On top of that, we have English learners that needed more funding. We have at-risk students that needed more funding.
Right.
And we needed to build more schools.
You know, Governor, we have all those things here also. And yet we haven't increased spending on public education as you have. I mean, I'm just interested in, again, the calculation seems offline from partisanship or ideology or politics.
I'm going to go back to the basic building blocks that have, I believe, transformed Virginia. And where we started again was a state that was bottom third in job growth, that we had the largest learning loss in the nation in fourth grade reading and math during the pandemic because the schools had been closed by the previous administration. A 20-year high in murder rate. And we saw a state that was seeing more people move away than move to it for 9 straight years. Right. That's what we started with. And at the core of building a future is building a vibrant economy, and that's what we've done. We were rated by CNBC as the top state for business this summer, and that reflects an enormous amount of work by our administration. But it also was reflected in results, 250,000 more jobs now than when we started, more Virginians working than ever. but it allows us then to invest in the things that we need to invest in. Education and the future of our commonwealth and our country is going to be decided by the quality education that our children get.
I want to ask you about these lab schools, which I alluded to earlier. So the way that your bio and writings about this program frame it is this was your way to introduce choice into the system. How did these lab schools work, and how do they create choice for families in Virginia?
So Virginia has very few charter schools.
Right.
In fact, I think we have 8. I mean, like North Carolina has 190.
Yeah, we have a lot here.
Yeah, we have very few charter schools, and so there's not a lot of choice within the public school system.
Right.
And so we embraced the idea of a lab school, which is a partnership between the local school system and one of our universities. And we put aside funding in our first budget that would provide planning grants and then subsequent funding. And we asked the schools and the universities to go customize a lab school that meets their geography's most important needs.
Right.
And the work was amazing, and I'll just give you a couple examples.
Sure.
We cut a ribbon last week on a lab school that is the future education lab school in rural Virginia that will, in combination with our community college and a couple of our universities and a whole bunch of counties, graduate 100 teachers a year that will come back and work in each one of those hard-to-hire counties.
They'll be obligated to stay in.
Obligated,
right.
Coming back, and they will graduate from high school with an associate's degree, and they'll go to 2 years of one of our 4-year universities, and they'll come back.
Do they have to pay to attend that school?
No.
So it's free?
It's free. Yeah.
So this is not a voucher program?
No.
No. Do you believe in vouchers?
I do.
Why aren't they in law in Virginia then?
Because every time we've introduced the bill, the Democrats kill it.
Okay. So,
and by the way, what's really interesting
Yeah.
is the flow of families from all over Virginia, from rural Virginia, from urban Virginia, families that are single parent and double parents, families that represent working moms who all want it. They want it, but we can't get it passed.
So, here you may know, because I think you know Governor Abbott, there's been a fight over school choice in Texas for some time. It has been both Democrats, but critically rural Republicans who have killed vouchers up to this point. Governor Abbott made a decision to target some of those rural Republicans, finding or funding challengers, certainly endorsing challengers. He may or may not get it next time. The arguments against have been threefold, and I want to pressure test this with you, because you say introducing school choice, if you had the votes, would be something you do.
I would do. We've introduced it, an education savings account.
Right.
That would take some portion of the funding that goes into our schools, and we would allow parents to take some portion of that with them.
Right. So the concern is, first of all, that ultimately funding for public education is going to be cut. Schools are going to have less if we create a voucher program. It's not going to be revenue neutral. Is that how you would do it?
Well, I mean, if you have a whole bunch fewer students in your school system, you don't quite need the same amount of money to fund it.
But the cost to operate a school doesn't go down if you have fewer students. I mean, you understand that there are expenses that are baked into the cake here.
Well, yeah, but I do think there are two arguments here.
Right.
One, on one side, when folks are arguing against school choice, they make that argument.
Right.
But on the other side, if your population grows by 2%, they ask for incremental funding because you have more students.
Right.
So the reality is,
do you fund on the basis of enrollment or attendance?
We fund based on the number of students in a school.
Got it. So if the number goes down, you'd say logically you would fund less.
You would fund less.
The second argument is that these schools that would happen in Texas and receive vouchers don't have to take your kid the way the public schools have to take your kid. Do the lab schools have to take your kid?
Yeah, so just to finish up what some of these lab schools look like, we have a space high school by where we launch rockets.
Yeah.
We have a maritime school that's being built where we build ships.
All specialized.
We have STEM and coding lab schools in certain parts of Virginia. And we, in fact, are going to have a healthcare lab school in Southwest Virginia where there's a big shortage of healthcare.
So if my kid wants to go to any one of these, does he or she get in automatically?
They will get in as long as there's spaces, and if it gets full, then it is literally a lottery.
Got it. Okay.
So
the third argument is about accountability. That the schools that receive in the form of vouchers what are tax dollars Public schools are held accountable for the use of tax dollars on public education. The argument here, at least, has been that if tax dollars go to pay for vouchers and vouchers then go to private or parochial schools, they would not be subject to the same accountability system. I know you've had a fight over accountability in education in Virginia, right? Do you believe that if you have education savings accounts, that those schools should be held accountable in the same way as the public schools?
I think the key is understanding that they are accredited schools, or whatever the state process of affirming that it is a quality school in order to go to.
Are the lab schools subject to the same accountability metrics in Virginia as the public schools are?
Because they're part of the public school system.
Because they're in the system.
They're in the system. They are part of the public school system.
Right, okay. You referenced cutting taxes. My understanding is you cut $5 billion in taxes over the time you've been...
We have cut taxes and provided tax rebates.
Who are the beneficiaries of the tax relief, Governor?
All Virginians.
Right.
The biggest proportionate of our tax cuts have gone to lower and middle income Virginians, because our biggest movement in tax relief was a substantial increase in the standard deduction.
Okay.
And so that is it's a very progressive move.
It's not a regressive benefit.
No, it is. And those folks, I mean, everybody gets a full participation. And so I do believe that we should be careful to make sure that folks do understand they have a responsibility to pay some tax. And that's a really important, just philosophical point.
Yeah.
We went to work and substantially increased our standard deduction. And then we also provided up to $40,000 of full tax relief to our veterans on their retirement. Great. And I felt like our veterans, they have sacrificed everything for our nation and for our state to be taxing.
I don't know who would argue with you about that. Right, yeah. Now, we mentioned that this new surplus, I think it was, my reading was that it was a $1.2 billion surplus.
Yeah, so we have, my first year we had about 2, my second year we had about 3, and we had 1.7 until we hit a budget deal and they used 500.
Now it's 1.2. So the 1.2 billion, what I read was your view, please correct me if I'm wrong, is this money is a surplus, we should be returning this money back to the taxpayers.
Yeah, I specifically have said we should be returning a portion of this back to taxpayers.
A portion.
And what we should not do is go spend it all. We should use a portion of it to invest in tax relief.
Right.
And we could take a portion of it and invest in our shared priorities. And that's something that with a Democrat-controlled legislature, we work through shared priorities. This past spring, in what was, a real contentious budget process, but we sat in a room and we settled on a balanced budget that in fact didn't raise taxes, which is what they wanted to do, and invested in a lot of very important topics, with education being the top of the list.
I'm interested in the idea of targeted tax relief for veterans, say, or for people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. I wonder, as a person who has been successful in business and has got a high net worth, if you think people at your income level should receive tax relief.
First of all, let me just begin with the fact that in Texas, you don't pay income taxes.
No income tax.
I guess everybody gets tax relief in Texas. Is that the right way to think about it?
We could spend probably an hour on this subject. You know that.
So what I have consistently argued is that we can provide tax relief for all Virginians.
Right.
Because we have a substantial tax burden on Virginians. And if you look at everything in an isolated, only Virginia case, you miss the whole picture.
Okay.
And so here's what I constantly encourage Virginians and other states to take into consideration. Businesses and people have a choice. Where do I want to live?
Right.
Where do I want to invest? And there are lots of factors that go into that. One of them, which is usually cited as one of the most important, is the economic opportunity that I have where I go live.
The tax burden.
And the tax burden is huge.
Which is why we have so many Californians coming to Texas, is at least in part because they see, I don't have to pay as much.
And it's why people are leaving California, New York, Illinois, Michigan, Maryland. They're all leaving because the tax burdens are high.
Can I ask you a philosophical question? Because we're about to enter the last 2 months of an election cycle in which this is being talked about. We hear on the Democratic side, first, it was President Biden. Now it's Vice President Harris as the nominee. Before that, it was President Obama. We've heard this for a while. Wealthy individuals in this country should pay their fair share. There's been a discussion of raising raising taxes on people who have been successful and have the most and can afford to pay more. What do you think about that?
Well, we first have to begin with some of the basic facts, which is a small number of people in America pay the vast majority of taxes.
Okay.
And that's just truth. And
Is that okay with you?
yeah, well, that's the way the tax system is set up.
Right.
Right. And we do have a progressive tax system.
Yep.
Where people who make more money pay much more taxes, and a lot of people who make less money don't pay any taxes at all.
Right.
And that's the way the system is set up.
Yes.
There's also a recognition that when we raise taxes, it does hurt the economy. And what we are seeing right now is an economy that, and the jobs numbers this week confirm it, and the reaction from the stock market is, you know, we've watched an economy where the brakes have come on. And the reality, of course, is that what happened in the Biden-Harris administration is they did unleash unfettered spending. They did. And even the Democrat economists said, you're going to drive inflation if you do this. And they did it anyway.
This is Larry Summers and Jason Furman.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, these are folks that people trust on the other side.
You're a recipient.
Well, let me just finish.
Yeah.
So they unleashed unfettered spending and drove 40-year high inflation. And the only way to stop it was for the Federal Reserve to slam the brakes on.
Right.
And that has now caused 2/3 of Americans to live paycheck to paycheck. I mean, literally paycheck to paycheck, 2/3 of Americans. And that's why the economy is the top issue in this election. Every poll, what's the biggest issue? The economy, I'm worried, I'm worried, I'm worried.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, raising taxes is completely counter to what we need to do to go build a good economy.
And even if the vice president says, I'm proposing an increase in the top tax rate, but not quite as much as my boss, the president at the moment, says, that's not enough from your perspective.
She does not want to continue the Tax Cut and Jobs Act tax relief that was in the first Trump administration. She has told everybody that she does not support the extension of that. And that is a real problem. That is a real problem.
Governor, let me just ask, if you believe that the Biden administration's spending was off the hook, you as governor could have rejected those dollars, could you have not? So when the Inflation Reduction Act or the big infrastructure bill is passed, if you oppose those things on principle, then maybe you shouldn't have taken the money.
And there's some things we have taken and some things we didn't.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I just be clear.
The infrastructure bill has brought how much money, you think, ballpark, to Virginia?
I can't tell you.
A lot.
I can't tell you other than what I do know is, so we were first in line for broadband support.
Right.
And Virginia put an enormous amount of money up in order to make sure that every Virginian has high-speed, affordable internet access.
Right.
And the federal government ran a program, and we were first to submit. We were first to frame it out, and we received accolades from every other state saying we're just going to copy your application.
Yes.
So
yeah, but I guess my point is that spending was okay, though. That spending was okay.
that was an investment in America. That wasn't spending.
But to access federal funds.
Listen, I said we've taken a lot, and we have turned away some.
Okay.
I mean, it's just the way. I mean, bottom line is.
Yeah.
What happened in the federal government unleashed inflation in America, and it is incontrovertible.
And you believe the election is going to be litigated along those lines?
And I think the election is clearly going to have a big say on which path do we want to go.
Right.
Do we want more of that, or do we want to go back to what President Trump built in his first administration, which was a great election? Please
let me ask you about economic development. I want to be sure we cover the things, and then we're going to have questions from the audience, sir.
Perfect.
Economic development has been a big priority in your administration. How do you feel about economic incentives for businesses that want to relocate in Virginia? You know that within your party, there are some grassroots conservatives who think that's corporate welfare. What's your view of use of incentives to attract business?
Well, first of all, it is an investment, and it has to be treated like an investment. It's taxpayer money, and therefore the rigor that we go through to make sure that we are going to have a return on that investment that is positive to the Commonwealth of Virginia is critical.
Comes in the form of business taxes and jobs?
comes in the form of business taxes and jobs.
And do you require those as part of a contract with a company? If you're going to get
Absolutely.
these incentives, you have to meet these thresholds.
Performance-based, when you hire people and invest money, we will in fact provide the incentive that we promised.
And has that been essential to your success in this way?
It has been essential to our success to compete with the
Yeah.
fact that every other state does this. And
Well, not every state does it. I mean, there are some states where, as I said, I think the conversation is turning away from incentives over a concern that we're advantaging people who have so much money they don't need our money. They should just locate their businesses here anyway.
well, one of the course realities is if I'm competing against Texas for a manufacturing facility, and in Texas, new employees don't pay income tax because they don't.
Right.
There's
that tax cut again.
There's a tax cut. I have a different equation, which is, can we provide tax relief to Virginians, or do I use the income that the state would receive from those taxes in order to incentivize that company to come?
So you referred earlier to working with the Democratic legislature.
Yeah.
This happened because in 2023, your party, as people talked about it, was going to keep control of the House and flip the Senate and give you the trifecta.
That was the aspiration.
That was certainly what people thought might happen. Instead, the Democrats flipped the House. They kept the Senate.
Yeah, but we picked up a seat in the Senate.
Sure, but
But I just want you to tell the whole story.
No,
You can frame it that way.
I asked Karl Rove about it today, and Karl Rove said, well, actually, there was a lot of good news out of that election cycle for Virginians because, in fact, in a lot of the districts in the House, I believe, where Joe Biden had been successful in 2020, we actually won seats. He said it was a mixed bag at worst, and in fact, good news for Governor Youngkin at best. The conventional wisdom has been because abortion was discussed as one possible issue that would be focused on by the trifecta, that there was a response among the electorate to make certain that that didn't happen, and that's why you did not retain control of the legislature. What do you think about that? Karl thinks that's not. Karl said this morning he did not think that was a correct reading. What do you say? You're inside the belly of the beast.
So let me just begin to set a little bit of a more clear table setting.
Sure.
So first of all, there was a slight majority in the House that we had when I came in. I brought with me. And there was a slight majority for Democrats in the Senate.
Yes.
And so I had mixed government from the day I showed up.
Right.
Second of all, there had been redistricting before I showed up, but it didn't take effect until 2023.
Yes,
and the maps were redrawn.
Yes.
And of course, the person that drew the maps actually said we drew the maps to make it hard for Republicans to win like they did in 2020.
This is redistricting.
This is the way it is. It's redistricting.
Both parties do it.
And we knew that going into it. And so we went to work to say, hey, listen, let's see if we can address a lot of concerns. And so one of the first things we said is on abortion, let's find common ground. Let's find common ground. Let's try to find a place where a baby feels pain in the womb. And let's gather around that and see if we can find a place to agree as opposed to disagree.
Right.
And that was one of my primary goals. Of course, that issue was not an issue that the Democrats liked my messaging. And so they ran a whole bunch of ads saying that we were going to ban abortion and arrest doctors and women, which was nothing in the case.
That's other states.
That's not the case.
Yeah.
And so what we spent time talking about was common ground on abortion, and then second of all of our success on growing an economy, building an educational platform, making communities safer, transforming the behavioral health system. I think Virginia will lead the nation in our behavioral health system transformation and making Virginia the best place to live, work, and raise a family. And by the way, I think we've done that. And so we ended up losing one seat by 1,200 votes that changed everything.
Yeah.
Now the reality,
but the shorthand that this was about abortion, you rejected.
I rejected. I do think it was part of the calculus.
Right.
But there were lots of other factors. The very good things that we look back on that election. One, we as Republicans for the first time embraced early voting and embraced absentee voting. And it was really, really important.
Right.
And I told everybody.
And turnout was good as a result.
And turnout was pretty good for a midterm election that's in an off year.
It's amazing what happens when you give people more of an opportunity to vote, they vote.
Well, I have a firm belief that if you have a chance to attract voters for 45 days versus one.
Right.
We want to do it over 45 days,
Sure.
not a single day.
Sure.
And by the way, it works. We ended up coming into
Yeah.
final election day with a far, far smaller deficit in each one of these races than we had in previous years.
So back to the question about the results of that election. The AP wrote at the time, with a full state House majority, Democrats will have even greater leeway to thwart Youngkin's policy agenda. I wonder if that's in fact what's happened. I mean, I was interested to hear you allude to kind of in passing earlier that because the Democrats control the legislature, you each had to move a little bit on public education, but you came to a compromise and you got stuff done, which many people would say is how it's supposed to be. So has this been a good thing or a bad thing in terms of where Virginia is with divided government?
Well, first of all, I do firmly believe that there are a number of initiatives and issues that we didn't get to where we needed to get to in order to get full benefit from.
Okay.
Yeah. The flip side is we got to a lot of good places. So in the budget that we signed, I wanted to reduce taxes, and I think we're going to need to reduce taxes one more time in order to keep the system moving.
Right.
They wanted to raise them by $2.6 billion. We didn't need to raise them. We had a budget surplus. Why are we raising taxes? Yep. And so we compromised and said we'll make no changes to tax policy. We pushed hard on childcare, and we had introduced and started driving forward with a fundamental overhaul of our childcare system to really go to work, particularly for working families and working mothers. And we agreed that's what we should do. And I think Virginia's building blocks for Virginia families is, again, leading the nation in how to support childcare for working families and particularly mothers. It's really important. We went to work on the behavioral health system. And I have to say, we have a crisis in this country, and particularly with our young people. And so we funded in for capacity build, workforce build, and a complete overhaul in the way that we go deliver support for Virginians that need help when they need it, where they need it. Not in a hospital, but in other places.
And you had common ground with Democrats on that also.
Common grounds there as well. And I had to push them awfully hard in order to continue many of the things on the economic development front, but they came my way because the success is there. And it's
well, the reality is they probably wanted a horse trade with you, right?
This is what you do.
But see, it's what you do when you have two parties actually at the table together.
Yes, we do. I have to say that I vetoed 200 bills during the session. And they understood that there were some things I'm not doing.
You're the governor.
And there's some things that I will do.
Yeah.
And I do believe, again, we worked well to get a good budget passed.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't get everything I wanted. They didn't get everything they wanted. But we got a good budget passed for the Commonwealth of Virginia.
So let me ask you about the political situation in your party now and your place along the spectrum, and ask a question about the presidential race, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience.
Perfect.
If that's okay. So this summer, Jonathan Martin in Politico wrote the following.
You're reading the wrong stuff.
No.
Just want to start there.
Glenn Youngkin remains torn between the main current of his party today, Trumpist grievance politics, and being the pragmatic governor of a Democratic-leaning state. His point is, and I alluded to this earlier, that you have walked this line between the forever Trumpers and the never Trumpers, and you did it very successfully, very deftly, in the election in 21. Do you believe that's the right place to put you along that continuum? I mean, the way that it's often positioned here in Texas, for obvious reasons, is there's the Bush wing of the Republican Party, and there's the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. They don't get along, and MAGA has more momentum right now. I believe that George W. Bush could not get through a Republican primary today in Texas. So where are you along that continuum, and what do you think of what's become of your party?
So I was asked when I stepped into this, and for anybody that jumps into politics from an outside position, I mean, I was a 30-year business guy, and as I said, I was frustrated with what I saw going on, and so I stepped in. Everybody asked me, what kind of Republican are you?
Right.
And what I respond back is, I believe in lower taxes, I believe in streamlined regulations, I believe in the power of free enterprise.
Yep.
I believe that parents should have a role at the table, and we should have high expectations for our kids. And most importantly, I believe that we have more police officers as opposed to less police officers. Yep. We can reduce crime, and government should work for you. I firmly believe that we need a strong America in order to have a safe world. I firmly believe we need a secure border and not have an open flow of people coming into this country. I firmly believe that if we have a rip-roaring economy in this country that we have seen built before and we're struggling with now, we can lift up all Americans. That's what I believe.
This is who you are.
This is who I am. I believe that what Donald Trump represents in this two-person race is consistent with what I believe policy-wise and results-wise. And I believe that Kamala Harris represents weakness on all those fronts. She doesn't know how to build an economy. She doesn't know how to build an economy. And listen, housing's an enormous issue in America today.
Right.
And
affordability.
Affordable housing is a huge issue.
Right.
And it's a topic that we are absolutely running head on in Virginia to make sure that we can increase housing supply so we have more affordable housing.
Right.
Giving people money to buy a house that doesn't exist is counter to supply and demand. That to me is a bad policy decision. The right policy decision is how do we get more houses built in America and in Virginia? I firmly believe that the fundamental approach from a Harris administration will not result in a rip-roaring economy. I do believe that she has no interest in securing the border. She's had a chance to do this for the last 3.5 years, to be engaged. She hasn't done it. Every state is a border state. Listen, we have 5 Virginians on average that die a day from fentanyl overdose. We just had them.
Fentanyl overdose is not coming across the border the way that migrants are. It's coming through the ports.
Well, I actually don't believe that.
You don't believe that?
No, I don't believe that. And if you were to go get the briefings that I've had, you would think differently. And so I will just tell you, I believe some of it comes through the ports, but I do believe that your assertion is incorrect.
Well, I'll tell you, okay.
So I'm just, I mean,
send me the reports, Governor.
Yeah,
I'll take a look.
I can't send them to you because you don't have the same ability to read them that I do.
Yes, but I'm interested. All right, yeah. I mean, but Governor, I can't.
There's a lot of it that's classified.
I can't fact check myself unless I have something to fact check myself with.
But what I would say, Evan, is this. What I would say this, and my point there is, I think there's a lot that comes through the ports.
Yes.
There is an enormous amount that comes illegally across the border.
Yes.
And we know it comes from China.
Right.
We know it's assembled in Mexico. We know it's coming across the border.
Right.
We know that it's either going to California and then out of airports and flown around the country,
right,
or it's coming up the highway system. And in Virginia, it comes up Route 85 and 95, 81 and 95. And the net of it is we know where it's coming from. And there are very specific things that need to be done in order to secure the border. I don't believe Kamala Harris will do that. I believe Donald Trump will.
All right, so let me ask you, you're enthusiastic about supporting former President Trump in this election. Do you believe Virginia is winnable for the former president? You outlined a series of conservative policies that got you elected in Virginia. That would lead me to believe Virginians support those policies because they support you. And yet, this is not one of the 7 states that's going to decide the election. Arguably, it's out of reach, right? Until Barack Obama won Virginia in 2008, no Democrat had won Virginia since Lyndon Johnson. The last 4 elections in the Commonwealth have been blue. Commonwealth has been blue. And as you said earlier, Joe Biden won Virginia by more than 10 points, which was the largest margin since FDR in 44. So what's the disconnect? The conservative policies got you elected, but the policies you say former President Trump is advocating for and that you support aren't enough to get him over the line there.
Well, you didn't hear me say that, so that's your assertion.
Well, it is, but okay, but tell me where I'm wrong.
So if I could, so Biden won by 10. The next year, we won by just under 2.
Sure.
And Virginians were ready to see something very different than what they were seeing. And of course, what they were seeing was progressive policies undermine the economy, undermine education, undermine law enforcement, and undermine their belief in what was going to be a good future.
Yeah.
What we see today is, in the most recent public poll, has, I think, Harris up by 3, which is in a 4% margin of error. And so Virginia's competitive. Listen, is it going to be a lift? Yes, but it is competitive. And just compare that to the fact that 3.5 years ago, Joe Biden won it by 10. And now Kamala Harris is up by 3 and in the margin of error in a poll. I believe that is because Virginians, 1, have seen common sense policies work, build a strong economy, it lifts up everybody.
Right.
And second of all, they have seen what the Biden-Harris administration has delivered, and they're not satisfied with that. Yep. And so they have seen the absolute track record that Donald Trump exhibited in building an economy. They've seen the absolute track record that the Biden-Harris has exhibited in building economy, and they've seen the track record that I have delivered in building economy. And that's why I think that Virginia is competitive. I'll repeat. Is it a lift? Sure, it's a lift.
Right.
But
is it a swing state?
It has a chance of being a swing state. It really does.
Has a chance.
Yeah, it has a chance of being a swing state.
So you're not running next year because you're barred constitutionally from running. Your lieutenant governor got in the race this week. There's some sense that your attorney general may get in the race as well.
Yeah, I don't know what he's going to do yet.
Are you endorsing?
Not until I see everybody is in the race.
If there's a big, would you be comfortable with your lieutenant governor being governor?
Yeah, I think she's great.
You would.
I mean, I said yesterday, she's been a great lieutenant governor.
Right.
I'm a big fan of Winsome Sears, and I think she'd be a great governor.
Right.
And that's just clear. She also understands what we have done during this administration in order to transform Virginia and deliver the kinds of results that we have. And she's gonna continue to do that. And I think that's going to be a very, very strong part of why Virginians, again, will want to elect another Republican governor, because they're going to want more of what we've been doing.
Right. What are you going to do when you're no longer governor? There are two lines of thought. One is that you're going to run for the Senate in 26. The other is that you're going to run for president the first time that nomination is available. If former president wins, I think people assume it's one term. If he loses, we know there's a potential race for the nomination in 4 years. So are you going to run for the Senate? Are you going to run for president? What are you going to do?
Well, if I can first step back, one of the crazy things in the political world is everybody wants to know what you're doing after you finish the job that you're in.
Correct.
And I have a firm belief that the most important thing that I'm doing is the job I'm in. And I think we have to continue to stay focused on that. And so I have been saying this for the last few years, which is, I love Virginia. They hired me to do a job, and I want to do it the very best I possibly can so that Virginia can continue to excel and soar and be the best place for everybody in the country to want to live.
So you're not going to think about what you do next until this job is done?
Yeah, I fundamentally believe that part of the problem we have is that we've built a political class that believes that politics is a career as opposed to public service. And for me, I believe it's public service. And so I want to finish this job.
Okay, I like that. That's good, Governor. Thank you. All right. The Texas Tribune's Brandon Formby is going to come out on stage, ask a couple of questions that were pre-submitted on behalf of the audience.
Perfect.
Governor. Brandon.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi. So our first one actually comes from your home state. Gretchen from Nelson County, Virginia asks, as governor, you vetoed much of the gun safety legislation that landed on your desk this year. What concrete actions do you think states should take to reduce the uniquely American epidemic of gun violence?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the good question. And it's particularly pertinent
this week. Right, yeah.
And I do think we should just stop for a minute. And I know that the just horrific actions from this week in Georgia not only bring us all to our knees for the families of the victims and all those children, but they bring us to our knees to pray for our country. I just want to begin, first of all, Virginia has some of the toughest gun laws in the country. And that is just...
Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I think the audience probably is not aware of what you mean by that.
Yeah, so Virginia has a full extent of laws to prohibit those folks. They call them red flag laws. Those exist in Virginia. You can't buy a handgun until you're 21. There's no such thing as a gun show exemption. You get a full, complete background check every time you buy a gun. I mean, we're ranked, and we have some of the toughest gun laws in the country.
Do you support those? Do you support those restrictions?
Yeah. So those restrictions, as I came in, people said, "What do you want to do with these restrictions?" I said, "Those are our laws. They're working." And we're going to look forward as opposed to back.
But you could have made a choice, Governor, to try to undo those, and you didn't.
No, I mean, the reality, of course, is, Evan, I am a practical governor.
Okay.
I work on things that I know we can go get done and move the state forward.
But you understand a Republican governor who is into red flag laws and background checks at gun shows and is not attempting to undo those is not necessarily the norm.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, those are the laws that exist in Virginia, and therefore, what next? And so what next for me on the primary responsibility of a governor's primary responsibility, first and foremost, is the safety of Virginians, and for Greg Abbott, it's the safety of Texans, and so that's what we have to do.
Yep.
And so what we have worked on are a number of things. One, We make sure that there is an action plan, an emergency action plan has been written in code that is formulated and blessed and enshrined in an MOU with law enforcement for every school.
Okay.
That's really important. It's a threat assessment team that exists in every school system and an action plan on how to react. With that, we've now worked to digitize all the floor plans so that we not only are prepared, but we have the tools we need in order to act.
Right.
Second of all, we've gone to work to make sure that our students are getting the support, particularly in the behavioral health world, that I think has just absolutely overwhelmed so many of them. At the end of the day, we have a crisis in mental health in our young people, and we can't ignore it. And so one of our big initiatives has been to drive resources, counseling resources live and telemedicine so that students know that they can get the help they need when they need it. That's been hugely, hugely important, and we will absolutely continue to drive that.
Right.
And then finally, we need to recognize that safety in schools is enhanced when there are school resource officers in the building. And I will tell you, the school resource officer in Georgia should be celebrated, lauded, because what he did was intervene and stop what could have been
worse.
Much, much worse. And so when we came in, we had a lot of schools in Virginia that had actually gotten rid of school resource officers. We pushed forth record funding in order to put school resource officers back into the schools. And I'm really pleased by the fact that we either have school resource officers or security services in virtually every high school, every middle school, and most elementary schools in Virginia. Really important. So we're continuing to drive forward on what I believe are really important foundational pieces to make sure that our schools are safe.
Thank you, Governor. Brandon.
Jasmine from San Antonio asks, how do you think your changes in parental involvement in the school system have impacted K through 12 teacher retainment?
Teacher retention? You mean this is teacher retention? So are teachers reacting favorably or unfavorably to your emphasis on parents' rights?
So we survey all of the teachers every year who leave. And the top 3 reasons why they say they're leaving, and this is what they put in, are unruliness in school and concerns about that, just behavior in school. 2, the administrative burdens that have been placed on them to do far more than just simply teach. And then oftentimes it's the third one has everything to do with their tenure of teaching and they're ready to retire. I've been teaching for 40 years and I'm ready to retire. Those are the top issues that teachers talk about when they leave. And so that's why it's been so important to us to re-emphasize safety and security in the schools and to make sure that the teachers understand that we're with them when it comes to really what has been terribly poor student behavior. And we need to make sure that teachers aren't stuck not only trying to teach and aren't stuck trying to administer multiple extra programs, but on top of that, being the primary disciplinarian in the school too.
But so the implication is that what you've done on parents' rights has not been a disincentive.
No, I don't believe so at all.
Yeah, you've not seen that in the polling. All right, Brandon.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Henry from Austin asks, how do you view your role in shaping the future of the Republican Party, both within your state and the nation?
Well, that's a humbling question for a guy that's been doing this for
years.
3.5 years.
Right.
And when I stepped into this role, my primary objective is to be the best governor I can be and to have Virginia be the best state in America. And that's what we continue to do. I think the primary role I have is to demonstrate results, policies, and governor actions that work, and then to share those with people. And we do a lot of that. We share a lot of best practices, and I think that is one of the primary things that I can do as an active governor. I do work to get Republicans elected. If it's not clear, I'm a Republican governor, and I believe that our goal here is to extend our majority in the House and to flip the Senate and to put strength back in the White House. And so I've spent time doing that as well. But at the end of the day, my primary job is to be the best governor I can be and make sure that Virginia is the best state it can be.
One last one, Brandon, please.
Paula from Southlake asks, what parts of Project 2025 do you support?
What a funny question. I haven't even read Project
Never take the last question.
I know,
Always
never
the rule
take
there.
You know,
You say you haven't read
I haven't even read Project 2025, and just to put the whole thing in context, think tanks write transition plans, and they've all been doing it from the beginning of time.
Yep.
They really have. I mean, you know, they've been doing it for, and I know they've been doing it for at least 40 plus years, and there's always one. And so I do think it is convenient for, again, the left progressives to grab this thing and try to pin it on everybody, when the reality is it is a transition plan written by a think tank. And
but a lot of the people who were involved with the writing of it, Governor, were people who had been very close to or worked for Donald Trump. Like, it's not a huge leap, right?
But I mean, I know it's a hard thing to believe, but when you're elected governor, I make decisions as governor, and when the president is elected president, he makes decisions as president.
Right.
And you know, the people who work for us don't get to make those decisions. We do. And,
right.
And I know that there are folks who work with me who might have different policy ideas, but at the end of the day, I listen to them, and I
hold you accountable for your.
And I choose where to go, and that's because the buck stops with me, and I'm responsible for it. So, again, this is a moment for us to step back and say, what are the candidates talking about, and what policies are they going to press forward with? And again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. I think this is an election about strength versus weakness, and I think the primary issues are the economy, the border, foreign policy, and public safety. And in all of those areas, I believe that Republican majority in the House and flipping the Senate and getting Donald Trump back in the White House will provide better strength and better outcomes for America.
Governor, you've been a good sport for the last hour. We appreciate you being here. Please give Glenn Youngkin a big hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good. Appreciate you, sir. Thank you. Good.
Yep.
Everybody, thank you for coming. We'll see you next year. Thank you.